Good morning. It's Pop again, Dennis Murray. Today is Popcast 75. Yay for me. It's called Nature's Wisdom, Part 25. Uh, I'm going to say I'm kind of pleased that I've been able to put together 75 of these things. Um, and it's encouraging. I don't know how much more I have to say, but I kind of feel, pleased to have done this many and said the things that have come to me. Okay, about yesterday, you may remember that I mentioned 10 or 20 podcasts ago that Jung declined to create a summary of his points of view um, because he felt that uh, his explanations were about things deep in our soul, and they were necessarily complicated and detailed uh, insights, and that they didn't really yield easily to a summary, and that if he had attempted a summary, a good deal of subtlety and complexity would be lost. So, item one, I'm not young and I'm not remotely that deep. I haven't had the lifetime he had of seeing people with a psychologist insight. And I have not written 20 volumes like he did, 20 huge volumes that are only part of his work. And so, I, I do want to say that yesterday's summary, I realized when I finished it, had forgotten a couple of things I thought should have been included, and I had actually put in my notes. And it didn't give enough detail on a number of things. So I encourage you, if you're at all interested, to go back and listen to the individual podcasts. And, more subtlety, more complexity, more detail is there. And I do think, however, on balance, that having a brief summary day like yesterday um, is a good idea from time to time. So, today's work, where do we go from here? So, we have a new insight. Uh, I'm offering a new insight. Whether it's really an insight or not, time will tell. But I'm offering a new insight into the Great Divide and some ideas about lessening it. So, yesterday's summary gives us a fair, understanding of what that insight is and what some of those ideas are about lessening it. But what practical things can we actually do now, individually or together, to put these ideas to work to see if they actually are able to help lessen the Great Divide? And it seems to me that this has to begin with humility, because um, that's a key ingredient to an approach which has any chance of engaging other people who have perhaps deeply rooted and contradictory ideas that you're asking them to examine, which, most of the time, most of us don't examine our fundamentals because we just live by them. And we don't really want to examine them because it's time consuming and a lot of work. And it seems, that you're going against the great weight of tradition, which may be accompanied by religious or cultural supports, so that you may be being asked to examine issues that are taken for granted in your culture or your religion. and you may not want to, and you may resent being asked. So I think the best opening that has any chance of getting anywhere with other people um, is humility, and I think that because it's hard to practice, and it's probably the best place to start. So my friend Georgia said she thinks humility arises from our gratitude for the gift of life and for each other. And it arises in part because we realize in our gratitude that we didn't earn the gift of life. We didn't do anything to deserve it. It just came our way. Um, it's a fantastic gift of uh, incalculable value that makes us joyous. Hallelujah comes to mind. Um, and of course, the her point is that it's quick to forget the humility about the gift being unearned and start focusing on who you want to thank for the gift, and now you're off and running with your religion or your ethics or your philosophies. Um, but in the meantime, the humility that was there at the moment when you were considering that this fabulous gift has been given to you without anything on your part to earn it or deserve it. It's just say thank you and get on with living your thanks. You can forget the humility part too quickly, too easily. I think she has a very, very good point. So I think always humility has to begin with the speaker about him or herself. I don't see how any better way to start, a conversation with other people. So, I find it kind of hard, kind of easy to call myself stupid because I do so many stupid things every day. Most of us do. And I kind of laugh about it because, I've managed to have a life that feels extremely warm and fuzzy to me. It feels like, wow, things have just been so filled with wonderful things, people and places, adventures and huge amounts of love in my upbringing and my married life and as a father, grandfather, great grandfather, and some useful work to do. So um, uh, I think that in regardless in everyday life, I frequently make dumb mistakes, and I think we all do. The question is it good? Is it okay for me to call me stupid? I know I'm not supposed to call other people stupid, and I'm not supposed to think of them in those terms because it helps build the great divide. So maybe I shouldn't even think of myself as stupid, but I do. I, I have a little phrase I frequently use uh, in describing myself, and um, it's not suitable for prime time. It's naughty, um, but I do feel it sometimes applies. So, okay, so the general idea that you should give examples. I have a stapler here. Now you've seen this on my desk because my kids laugh and say, "Why don't you clean your desk and get stuff off it?" And like the stapler. Well, I mean, it's on the desk. It's my desk. That's So some of the other things that are not found on a super executive's desk, but it's found on my desk. So here it is. Well, I've owned it about, I don't know, 6 years, and I bought it from Staples, of all things. And every now and again, because I don't do a lot of stapling, because, I don't have a job anymore. I don't have a lot of paperwork I have to process, just some. Every now and again, the thing runs out of staples, and I have a big box of staples over here. So you have to lift this thing up like so, and then there's a little catch here, and you pull this catch. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to explain why. You pull this catch, and then you slide the new staples in and put the catch back in place, and it's supposed to work. Well, I've been able to get it loaded and worked once a year for the last 5 years, but about about 3 weeks ago, it ran out of staples, and it took me at least a week of trying to figure out how to get the damn things back in here. And I finally gave up doing it the normal way, where you pull this lever out and then you just slide them in and then push the lever in behind them, because it wasn't succeeding in forcing them into place. They were sliding around inside. So when you used the staple push, they weren't there to be, engaged. So they were sliding around inside here. Well, there's supposed to be a spring that forces them forward into place. Well, finally, after a week of trying, I thought, geez, I'm going to have to go on Google and Google how to use this stapler, or call the people at Staples and say, okay, help an old man out here. Do me a solid here, will you? So I tried one more last desperate trick. I tricked the staples into the thing and upside down so they'd come out the right way. And somehow they engaged the spring, and voila, it staples. I'm very happy. But I really think that at my age, if you need a Staple 101 refresher from Google, you got a problem. And, simple chores. I mean, I just do things, backwards a lot. And I make things a lot harder for myself than need be. And, like the phone. I mean, you have to remember to plug the phone in every night, or your cell phone won't hold during the day. And, my trainer works out with me by phone now because, we don't want to meet. And as it happens, she moved. So she's still my trainer, but by FaceTime. And, but, I got to have the phone charged, to do my workouts, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure all of you that are relatively honest with yourselves have got your own stories. Okay, so humility. I want to talk about the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, or sometimes referred to as the publican. And it's found in Luke chapter 18, verses 9 to 14. And because I think it's pretty relevant. Okay, so let's see. Two men went to the temple to pray. One was a proud, self-righteous Pharisee, and the other a cheating tax collector. The proud Pharisee prayed this prayer: Thank God I am not a sinner like everyone else, especially like that tax collector over there. For I never cheat, I don't commit adultery, I go without food twice a week, and I give to God 1/10 of everything I earn. But the corrupt tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed, but beat upon his chest in sorrow, exclaiming, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home forgiven. For the proud shall be humbled, but the humble shall be honored. And, I do think that the Bible is something that arises from our evolved psychology. I don't have any problem with the idea that evolution got put into the universe by a creator God. Um, but it seems to me that all the things in all the sacred literature of the world seem to arise from our own psychology, and the best of them are, pieces of wisdom that are always with us. And it's very, very easy to fall into this situation. You do a few decent good things in your life and you get to thinking your poop doesn't have an odoriferous content. And you'll get to some place in life when you're surrounded by acolytes who constantly praise you, and you get to think you're just as swell as they say you are. I knew more than a few lawyers who got to be judges, and sometimes in the space of a year or two of being catered to, you get a swollen head. Um, it's worth paying attention to the ancient wisdom. Uh, Sometimes it still is very applicable, and it also, as a general rule, when you're talking to other people, if you can find some commonly accepted wisdom in the sacred literature, um, it's not a bad place to turn to for authority. Um, it might be that, well chosen in the right context, it'll help open doors. This is uh, very much where we are, that we want to figure out what practical things we can do. One of the practical things we have to do is to learn more about how to engage each other without causing defensive reactions. Um, as I said, a lot of things are bound in religious and cultural traditions, so we don't even want to talk about them, because in part we're kind of busy, and they're the part of life you don't examine very often. And some guy wants you to stop what you're doing and examine this stuff, but it's pretty easy to not be interested. I don't have the time. It's not a problem for me. If you're worried about it, you examine it. Um, more and more possibilities along those lines, but a very, very common possibility is a defensive reaction. And it's been everybody's experience on both sides of the Great Divide, that talking about it is of no use. That people on one side already have reached a wide agreement about a variety of things, and they love hearing those things recited. Um, and people on the other side have reached a different agreement about the same variety of things. And everybody wants to hear people that agree with him talk, and nobody wants to listen to people that don't agree with them. And that's not going to be easy to deal with, and certainly confronting it and arguing logically about it seems to be of little value. So one of the things we're going to have to do is learn a hell of a lot more psychology about engaging each other without engaging defensive reactions, and without triggering defensive reactions. And I don't claim to have the expertise for that. I'm not saying that nobody has the expertise, but it's certainly not, something that's being taught in elementary schools or middle schools. How to talk to each other without causing a defensive reaction. And yet it needs to be. We're going to have to learn a lot more about how to do that, because we need to do that. And we're kind of at a standstill where it's pretty hard to go forward. So one of the things we can think about is rituals and symbols. Um, and when we, for example, think of sacred literature, which is full of rituals and symbols, as arising from our evolved psychology, um, whether or not you think an external divinity exists and made us, then it appears that divinity used our evolved psychology so that we become we and we have these thoughts and feelings, which are well expressed as the wisdom of our sacred literatures. Um, the point is, by owning the sacred literature, by seeing that they arise from within us, um, then we are less intimidated by the prospect of re-examining our sacred literature in the light of experience. So, nature's wisdom, which is what our psychology is giving us, which we often feel the sacredness of in certain parts of that wisdom and treat in the sacred literature. But it's all nature's wisdom, and nature's wisdom we can see changes from time to time as circumstances teach us things that we hadn't known before. So, I mean, the world thought it was okay to have slaves. Apparently, they thought that beginning with the time when um, we, God knows how far back, I don't know whether tribal people enslaved people from other tribes when they raided. Um, in all honesty, I can't tell you. I do know that they often stole women, and I have to assume, but I don't really know what for those women was their mental attitude when they were stolen and brought to a different village. And, um, you know, I can't begin to examine their mental attitude. I don't have the background. And I'm not going to make, facile assumptions that their mental attitude, 15,000 years ago was the same as ours, so that they would be so outraged they'd rather kill themselves than submit. Um, or, who knows? The point is that for a very, very long time, certainly dating from the time when we began to form villages and towns and political assemblies of territory, um, people enslaved other people, and and it was for the most part seen as it's just the fortunes of war. That's just your fate. Um, and I've always hated the idea of fate. I think that one of these days we're going to have a long talk about fate. I do not accept that there's an end game all set up and waiting for you, and you just have to walk into it. I just don't believe that. There's too much complexity and subtlety in the universe and in us, inside of us, um, uh, for that to be a reasonable way to look at things. Um, but that's for another day, so we can leave that. So, regardless, so if we own sacred literature as having largely arisen from our own evolved psychology, God given or not, um, then it's a little easier to apply to it the things that we see in everyday life about everyday matters. There's competing aphorisms for almost every aspect of life, and we have to take them with practicality. So there are moments in life when you need to stop and smell the roses, and perhaps more so in hard driving people's lives. But there are also moments when a stitch in time saves nine. That the guy who's out there ahead of the problem keeps the problem from becoming a much bigger problem. So, which applies today to you at the next hour, um, takes a bit of judgment. And so, almost everything you can think of has got two competing aphorisms, because there are circumstances when the two different ways of approaching are really called for you in the particular situation you're in at this moment. Um, nature's wisdom is complicated and it changes based on experience and circumstances. It doesn't mean that there's no uh, psychologically valid universal. There is one, and it's gratitude. It's living your gratitude uh, by using your gifts, and it's heeding the call of turning towards each other. But all the details about how one heeds the call of turning towards each other are up for grabs. They're up for arguments. And every circumstance has got a conflicting aphorism: spare the rod, spoil the child. So some, pretty harsh in their discipline of their children. Others feel to the opposite and use a different aphorism and are kindler and gentler. Um, every parent has to watch their child take risks. And, if the kid isn't allowed to suffer some setbacks and consequences, he won't learn that he's able to survive those, and that he has more capacities than he thought, because he was able to pull himself out of that mess. And there's no substitute for learning that if the child is to be born to himself and to have a wonderful idea of his capabilities, her capabilities, and be aware that sometimes you can do more than you expect when circumstances fall on your head. Sometimes you don't drown, you learn to swim better. But every parent has seen a child who is apparently going under for the third time and knows that you've got to reach in to that child's life and interfere. But nobody knows exactly where and when to apply, the wisdom of this. So that's the point. When you own our sacred literature, then our sacred literature becomes part of things that evolve and change as time and circumstances teach us. And that's extremely useful. So much, 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 much more on this matter of how do we proceed as practical matters. But Rome wasn't built in a day. Okay, take care. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.